The light is wrong in here. Not dark exactly, just wrong. The torches on the walls cast shadows that don't behave the way shadows should, pooling in corners that seem deeper than the geometry allows, flickering across stone that looks older than anything has a right to look. You came through a slipgate. You don't remember what was on the other side. You're not sure it even matters anymore. Your axe is in your hand. Your shotgun is on your back. Somewhere ahead, something is growling, low and patient. The sound of a thing that has been waiting in this corridor since before you had a name for what you were afraid of. You move forward anyway. The floor drops away beneath a walkway above you. You look up. There is a room up there, an actual room above your head with its own shadows and its own sounds and something moving through it. You've never been able to look up before. Not like this. This is something entirely new, a whole new dimension of gaming. Join us as we share the story of the game that broke the ceiling and the team that broke apart making it, as we take today's trip down memory card lane. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope these words find you well. Hello and welcome to the 304th episode of our video game history podcast, A Trip Down Memory Card Lane. Each week we'll tell you a story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game or the people who have created it. It can be about a console or the technology that brought it to life. We often talk about the companies that bring it all together, making our hobby video games a reality. While telling you each story, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. Today I'm excited. Today we are looking back at Quake, the 1996 first-person shooter from id Software that gave the world its first truly three-dimensional game engine, launched a multiplayer revolution that nobody saw coming, and because we know I love my drama, quietly tore apart one of the most important creative partnerships in the history of the medium. It started as a Dungeons and Dragons character with a magic hammer. It ended as something else entirely. I'm David Kassin, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, who I have no doubt has strong opinions about whether the game we got was better or worse than the game we almost got, and who will probably need at least 4 episodes to fully explain those opinions if I ever actually let him talk. He's my brother, Rob Kassin. Rob, simple question so we don't spend too much time on it. Hammer or shotgun?
Shotgun.
Well, then this Quake is for you, I guess.
Yeah.
You ever played Quake before? Any of them?
What was the one on the 64?
Quake 64.
Yeah, that's the one.
That's the one?
That's the one.
The multiplayer Quake?
Yep, that's the one that I played. It was multiplayer. So, not a ton of familiarity, but I got some, a little bit.
Yeah, I gotcha. I took the time to, because they, at some point, kind of not remade it, but like updated it so the textures were modern. It could not be like total trash on a modern whatchamacallit. They call it Quake Enhanced. I have it, so I played it in preparation. So I remember Quake.
Yeah, that's definitely fair, Dave.
That's
I'd
fair.
say you do.
Hey, you know what? It was like a blast from the past. I remember when Quake first came out too, so we're bringing it full circle.
You sure are.
Yes. I've been around long enough that those circles were squares, remember?
Well, they're squares to me just because I wasn't around.
Oh, yeah. So, the tale of Quake, kind of fun, kind of like and excited for this story. It's got its share of drama, and I'm all for it. But before we get into it, Why don't you take some time and share with our listeners what else has happened during this week in gaming history?
Well, kicking it off on June 22nd, 1979, a group of programmers and researchers at MIT founded Infocom in Cambridge, Massachusetts. While you may not recognize the name immediately, you will almost certainly know their work. Infocom built text adventures, games that unfolded entirely through words on a screen. No graphics, no sound, just prose and a blinking cursor waiting for your next command. Their flagship series, Zork, became one of the most beloved game franchises of the early PC era, and their writing set a standard for interactive storytelling that the industry spent decades trying to match. Infocom eventually fell to Activision in 1986, but their legacy never did.
Infocom's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I feel like they may have been talked about at some point.
Yeah, we definitely did an episode on them before. It's in the
Yeah,
archives. We talked all
check it
about
out.
Infocom and their start at MIT and then them making Zork and how Zork turned into, Infocom in its era made something like 35 text adventures that sold incredibly well. And then yeah, it was sold to Activision and they had creative differences and the rest is history.
And to learn that history, go check our archives. Next up, on June 27th, 1989, Mendel Palace was released for the Famicom in Japan, developed by a small studio you might know called Game Freak.
Oh, just a small studio.
Just small. And
Tiny.
if that name sounds familiar, it should, but probably not from Mendel Palace. Mendel Palace was Game Freak's very first console release, a puzzle action game about flipping floor tiles to defeat enemies, made years before the studio's founder Satoshi Tajiri turned his childhood love of catching insects into a little franchise called Pokemon. Mendel Palace is a genuinely fun game in its own right, and a fascinating early look at a studio that had no idea what it was about to become.
No idea whatsoever.
Yeah, no, I don't think anyone could have imagined.
They made Mendo Palace, also known as Quinty in Japan. And in some circles, Quinty is kind of known as one of the earliest indie games because Game Freak was literally like a couple of guys in a building who hand wrote a magazine, wrote it on paper, stapled it together themselves. And then to make a video game, they literally reverse engineered the Nintendo to be able to design that video game. Uh, and so like it was the indie studio before the term indie studio was ever even thought of as a term.
And the fact that you refer to Game Freak as that is just mind blowing to me.
That's where it started though.
I know, but like just to think that, insane.
I agree.
Next up, on June 23rd, 1996, the Nintendo 64 launched in Japan, arriving in stores one day after the game we're talking about today. The console launched alongside Super Mario 64 and Pilot Wing 64, and the response was immediate and overwhelming. Nintendo had kept the world waiting for years for its answer to the PlayStation, and Super Mario 64 alone made the argument it had been worth it. North America would have to wait until September, but the era of 3D console gaming had officially begun.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Indeed. A
You were a,
very good day.
yeah, you were a Nintendo 64 fan.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. I was fantastic. Obviously, I didn't get it till much later.
Yeah,
Most of
same.
growing up, it was my friends that all had it. But it was honestly one of my most played consoles growing up, more than the PlayStation.
I know I've said it before, but one of my fondest memories is still walking into Best Buy and seeing Mario 64 on this big screen, the big screen. They used to have huge TVs in the middle. And it was the first time I had ever seen anything like it. Yeah, I was hooked.
Absolutely. That's a completely fair response to that. Speaking of hooked, next topic is a game that I myself was hooked to for quite some time because on June 21st, 2001, Mr. Mosquito was released for the PlayStation 2 in Japan, developed by Zoom and later published in North America by Eidos Interactive. The premise? Exactly what it sounds like. You play as a mosquito. Your goal is to feed on the members of a Japanese household one blood draw at a time without getting swatted. It is deeply strange, quietly charming, and the kind of game that could only have come from a specific moment in PS2 history when publishers willing to take a flyer on almost anything. It has a small but devoted following to this day, and I am one of them. And we talked about it.
Yeah, we did an episode on weird video games based on this because you're a
Exactly.
fan.
So if you want to learn more about some weird video games, including Mr. Mosquito, go there and check it out.
I don't remember the other games we talked about in that episode. Do you?
No, Dave, I really don't. It's just that. That was like the big one.
I honestly don't remember. I know it's not the only game we talked about in that episode, but I do not remember the other ones, and I feel awful about it right now.
You could pause and go look.
Nah, what else we got? Our listeners can go look.
Indeed, you can. And last up for this week in gaming history, on June 25th, 2007, The Darkness was released for PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, developed by Starbreeze Studios and published by 2K Games. Based on the Top Cow comic book series of the same name, you play as Jackie Estacado, a mob hitman on his 21st birthday who discovers he is the latest host of an ancient supernatural force called the Darkness, which manifests itself as writhing tentacles that can devour enemies, tear through walls, and generally make a bad night considerably worse for anyone in your way. Starbreeze built it as a first person shooter wrapped around a genuinely affecting crime story. And the result was one of the more surprising critical successes of that console generation.
It was a very unique game. When it came out, we were like, it's not like it made a big splash, you know? I mean, it's not like a Halo or a Grand Theft Auto or anything like that, but we were all intrigued by it when it came out and played it, and it was a very interesting game. The Darkness is unlike other things we could play as at the time. Best way to put it.
Yeah, that one got past me, so I don't have much to say.
Okay.
But with that, Dave, I think people would rather hear about today's topic, so why don't you take it away?
They showed up for the earthquake. I don't know why I said that.
Beefcake.
Beefcake?
Beefquake.
That would have been a better one. Beefquake. That sounds gross.
True, it does.
Yeah, no thanks. The story of Quake begins years before anyone called it that. Around a table where the staff of id Software played Dungeons and Dragons together. John Carmack ran the game as the Dungeon Master. The party, a group of adventurers called the Silver Shadow Band, flew into battle on the back of a silver dragon. Among them was a towering fighter named Quake, who represented raw strength and fought with a magic hammer capable of leveling buildings. Quake never went anywhere without a companion, a floating sentient artifact called the Hellgate Cube, which struck enemies with lightning bolts. John Romero played as Quake. He later called it the most fun he ever had playing Dungeons and Dragons. That campaign did not end quietly. In early 1992, Romero's character made a deal with the demon, trading a forbidden book called the the Demonom. Demon. What is it called?
Demonomicron.
Demonomicron. Demonomicron.
Demonomicron. That's weird. Demonomicron?
Demonomicron.
I mean, people are going to definitely say it's wrong, but I feel like it's demonomicron. But that doesn't make sense. Demonicron. It should be demonicron. That's it. There's an extra on there. Omnomnomicron.
Demonicron. I probably mistyped it. Anyway, he traded a forbidden book. Wow, I'm leaving that in there. He traded a forbidden book for a magic sword called the Daikatana. I know that one.
A big katana.
That trade triggered a demonic invasion that wiped out the entire campaign world. Keep that sword in mind. We've talked about it before. We'll talk about it again. It matters much later in a much more painful context. Now, the character of Quake almost made it into a game years before id had the tools to build one. A preview tucked into the back of 1990's Commander Keen teased a follow up project called The Fight for Justice, a side scrolling role playing game starring a hero named Quake, the strongest, most dangerous person on the continent, armed with thunderbolts.
Thunderbolt, Thunderbolt.
Thunderbolts! The team explored the concept for about 2 weeks in 1991 before giving up. The technology to make a full color RPG, to make the game the way they envisioned it to be, simply did not exist yet, not for a small shareware studio that were working out of a duplex. So Quake, the character, the concept, went back into the drawer. Id moved on to Wolfenstein 3D, then Doom, then Doom 2, right? Each one redefining what a PC could do. By late 1994, with Doom 2 shipped and Heretic about to launch, the team gathered to decide what came next. It was John Romero who brought Quake back into the conversation. On December 1st, 1994, he posted to an online bulletin board to settle the growing speculation about what id's next engine would power. Okay, people, he wrote, it seems that everyone is speculating on whether Quake is going to be a slow RPG style light action game. Wrong. What does id do best and dominate at? Can you say action? I knew you could. Quake will be constant, hectic action throughout, probably more so than Doom.
All right.
Hold on to that quote too, because by the time Quake actually shipped, it would be true, but only because of a fight that nobody saw coming. The newest members of the team, designers American McGee and Sandy Peterson, had never been part of that original D&D campaign. But once it was explained to them, they were in. The whole team agreed broadly on the direction: a medieval world, true freedom of movement, and a character with a hammer who could really physically fight. To build any of that, John Carmack first had to solve a problem that nobody had solved commercially before. Every PC shooter up until this point, including Doom, was not actually three-dimensional.
What?
Doom faked it brilliantly, right? It used a flat two-dimensional map with height values added to the floors and ceilings, but that trick had a hard limit. You could never put a room directly above another room. The illusion only held if you stayed on one level. Quake needed to be real 3D. Remember, this is the mid 90s, right? 3D accelerators were about to be released. Mid 90s, it's still a little early. We're getting there, but we Nintendo 64, 96, PlayStation 9, mid 90s here, 94, 95. Like, we're in the era where 3D is the thing. That's where the industry is at the time. So Quake needed to be where the industry was at. They wanted to be the standard. It always wanted to be the standard. Doom was the standard, right? They wanted to have true freedom to look up, look down, all around, with rooms that were genuinely stacked over rooms, whereas there was no flat math underneath pretending otherwise. They didn't want to fake it. That meant that you had to build a new engine, build the engine's data structures from scratch, and then you had to figure out how to light a fully three-dimensional world and how to draw every textured surface correctly from any possible angle. Because when you can look at it from all directions, you have to be able to draw it from every direction. It's a problem called perspective correct texture mapping. These are all things that he had to do with no help from hardware because, again, in 1995, consumer 3D accelerator cards did not exist. We didn't have the G forces and the RTXs and the AMDs, 9700s of the. We didn't have any of that at this time. This is before that. Everyone, it's crazy to think of. You don't have this as a concept, I know, but it's crazy to think about that there was
What?
a time. What do you mean? What?
We had an old computer that didn't have fancy GTXs.
I get I while I do understand that, I know that you have experience without gaming computers, but you don't really have an experience of a time when there wasn't GPUs, because by the time you got into everything, that was a thing. Does that make sense?
I mean, I guess they were.
Console and computer. All of your consoles had them from the PlayStation 2 up,
I started on PlayStation 1.
Okay.
Yeah, the original, the big square one, not the fancy slimmed down one.
That's your one. I've learned that at least once a week you're going to remind me that I have zero idea about your gaming history and correct me on it. So there's your one today.
Damn straight. Also, what about the Game Boy Color? No GPU on that bitch.
Because you got me good last week with your RPG history.
Yes, sir. Sure did. So that happens
That
when you
was
leave when I was only fucking 11, 9,
7.
7.
7.
Yeah, 7. Because you were
You were
18.
7.
11
Oh,
years difference. 7, 18. That's the math I was trying to figure out.
you got there.
Fucking eventually.
Every one of the 64,000 pixels on a standard 320 by 200 screen had to be calculated and placed by the computer alone, the CPU by itself, 60 times a second, while also running the enemy AI, the sound, the player inputs, and eventually the network traffic. It was, in Romero's words, a tremendous undertaking. No doubt, John Romero. Good words. By January of 1995, John Carmack had advanced far enough to render a test level. It was nothing more than a box, but it was a 3D box built from a textured rectangle Carmack named a brush, and let him start working out how this new kind of space could even be stored in a computer's memory. There was no level editor yet, so American McGee spent weeks typing level geometry directly into text files by hand so that Carmack would have something to test against. Once the brush was actually working, Carmack handed the editor, soon named Quake Ed, over to John Romero, who spent the coming months building out its interface so that the rest of the design team could actually use it. In April of 1995, Carmack brought in reinforcements. Michael Abrash, a legendary programmer whose writing had helped Carmack achieve his own early side scrolling breakthroughs, left the job at Microsoft to join id and help build his renderer. Around the same time, a network programmer named John Cash came aboard to handle the real time multiplayer code that would let Quake connect players over the internet, something that almost no other game of that era attempted to do, or do well, even at that. Quake's design, as much as anyone could pin it down at this point in 1995, looked nothing like the game that eventually shipped. You played as Quake himself, a powerful melee fighter armed with a hammer that could be thrown and would return. Slammed into the ground for area damage, that same hammer from id's old Dungeons and Dragons table. The Hellgate Cube traveled with you, feeding on the souls of defeated enemies, and growing irritable if you went too long without a kill. Some of this design was made public deliberately. The October 1995 issue of PC Gamer put a close up of Quake's hammer on the cover under the headline, Brace Yourself for Quake. But the writer who flew down to the studio to report the story never actually got to interview John Romero. He was out of the office that week. So instead, The piece is built almost entirely around John Carmack and business lead Jay Wilbur, and that tells you something about where its attention actually was in October of 1995. Barely a paragraph of it is about Quake, the hammer wielding hero. Nearly the entire feature is about the engine. Carmack walks the reporter through the medieval setting almost as an afterthought. We wanted to do something different from Doom, he says. You know, sort of how we did the World War II stuff in Wolfenstein 3D, then switched to science fiction in Doom. Then, almost in passing, he adds the line that would look very different in hindsight. We don't want to do Doom 3. Now, he does confirm the game's origin himself on the record for the first time publicly. Quake is actually very, very loosely based on some characters and settings from a Dungeons and Dragons campaign of mine, he says. The rest of the piece is Carmack, plainly proud, walking through what the new engine could do that Doom's engine could not. Domed ceilings and arches where Doom only had flat surfaces, 3 times the polygons and 3 times the surfaces of any Doom level, murder holes and elevated walkways that let you shoot enemies hiding underneath you. It was a minimum spec of 486 running at 66 megahertz with resolutions
Damn.
up to 360 by 480.
Woo. Man.
I know, 66 megahertz, crazy. Carmack warned, though, that chasing higher resolutions would come at the cost of a frame rate, and that's a bad trade. He even loaded up an old Doom level, rebuilt in the Quake engine, just to show the reporter how far the technology had come in a year. Asked when Quake would ship, Jay Wilbur laughs. It's on the same schedule as all of our products. We plan to release it when it's finished. That way, we never miss a ship date.
That's awesome.
Both he and Carmack tell reporters that they are hoping for a release in time for Christmas. Christmas of 1995 came, and Christmas of 1995 went with no Quake. Quake would not ship for another 18 months.
Gosh, damn.
Sandy Peterson gave his own interview that fall to the long-running Finnish magazine Pilit, and his Pilit. I should have looked that up. Y'all know me and non-American words don't get along well. I'm sorry. Someone let me know what it is in there. His version of the game leaned much further into the role-playing side that, Carmack had barely mentioned. Sandy talked about the close combat, he talked about the hammer, the wide area attacks, monsters that could heal themselves if they escaped you, and one detail in particular that reporters loved: the ability to take a defeated enemy's severed head and sacrifice it at an altar for a power-up.
That's badass.
None of this was secret, and none of it was dishonest. It was simply where the design of Quake stood in late 1995, kind of frozen mid sentence, waiting on an engine that was nowhere close to being done. Throughout the summer and fall, the level designers worked in a kind of suspended animation. Romero, American McGee, and Sandy Peterson each built out a personal style using whatever rudimentary brushes and textures the engine would support that week. Adrian Carmack handpicked a 16 color palette with 16 gradients of light to dark for each color and built texture sets to match: stone and dirt for the world, blue and black crackle texture that Romero gravitated heavily towards, a heavy Aztec inspired set built for American McGee's section. That Aztec set never got used, by the way. After working with it for about a month, American walked into John Romero's office and told him flatly that he wasn't feeling it. He wanted something darker. Heavy metal, like iron or black steel, a dimension built entirely out of one oppressive material. And John Romero gave him exactly what he asked for. So Aztec went to the side and heavy metal came to the forefront. Adrian Carmack and Kevin Cloud built him a new set of foreboding industrial textures. An American used them to build what are called the Vaults of Zin, which would eventually become the second level of the game's third episodes, and one of the levels he was proudest of. About this time, the soundtrack took a similarly unplanned turn. American had been listening to Nine Inch Nails' The Downward Spiral on repeat, and one afternoon he and Carmack had walked out of Carmack's office together to float an idea. What if Nine Inch Nails scored Quake? John Romero was skeptical at first. He wanted something ambient and wordless, not the aggressive industrial sound that Nine Inch Nails was known for. But everyone agreed that the band could probably deliver something disturbing and atmospheric if asked. Id reached out through their agency. The answer came back within a day. Trent Reznor and his drummer were Doom fans, and they were in. By August of 1995, the engine was still nowhere finished, right? And the strain was starting to show. Some level designers had built and rebuilt the same room dozens of times, only to throw them out when Carmack changed some underlying piece of the game's architecture. There were around 50 R&D levels that existed at this point, almost none of which would survive into the final game. There was no real gameplay yet to test any of it against. The hammer didn't work. The Hellgate cube didn't even exist as code. There was nothing to do except building boxes and waiting. Then one morning, the team opened up their email and found something that nobody had asked for.
What's that, Dave?
A report card.
Oh.
John Carmack had graded every member of the team on their contribution to Quake in a single email sent to the entire company.
So everyone saw everyone's.
Everyone saw everyone's.
Wow, what a dick move.
Carmack gave himself an A-.
What the?
John
Okay.
Romero got a C.
Okay.
Nobody said anything to him about it. Romero, Adrian Carmack, and Kevin Cloud looked at the email together. They agreed that John Carmack was clearly under enormous pressure and decided to let it go rather than confront him. In hindsight, Romero would call that decision a mistake. The silence didn't fix anything. It just meant that the pressure stayed exactly where it was with nowhere to go. What Carmack actually wanted, it seems, was for Romero to set aside everything else he was working on. The level editor, the Ultimate Doom, the Heretic sequel, the steady stream of side deals that was keeping its income flowing, and he wanted him to put all of that aside and put his attention onto Quake alone. But the problem was that the engine wasn't yet ready for that kind of attention. There was no gameplay code to design around. Romero had kind of built the editor, built all these test levels, and reviewed everyone else's work. By his own account, there simply wasn't more for him to do on Quake. Specifically, nothing for him to do until Carmack's side of the engine caught up. The tension finally broke open on October 20th, 1995, 10 days before id's biggest public event of the year. The owners, John Carmack, Adrian Carmack, Kevin Cloud, Jay Wilbur, and John Romero, all gathered for their regular shareholder meeting. Once the routine business wrapped up, John Carmack said he had something he wanted to bring up. Romero is not doing enough work on Quake, he said. You are spending too much time on other projects, so I want to issue a formal warning, and your bonus will be less to reflect it.
Wow, what the fuck, man?
Romero pushed back immediately. He was working constantly, he said, just not only on Quake, because Quake didn't have anything for him to do yet. Adrian and Kevin both backed Romero up. They knew exactly how much he'd been working, but Carmack didn't budge. Now, a formal warning on paper didn't carry much practical weight. But Kevin and Adrian refused to vote for it outright, and Carmack, realizing it wasn't going to pass as written, gave up on the warning itself and went after Romero's bonus instead. Because of Romero's quote unquote lack of focus, his bonus would be smaller than everyone else's. Nobody in the room said anything more. Both sides understood without saying it out loud what was actually being weighed against what. If Adrian and Kevin pushed back too hard on Carmack, there was a real fear he might simply leave, and id without Carmack wasn't id at all. Okay, then, Romero said and shrugged. I guess that's what will happen then.
Wow.
10 days later, id threw the biggest party in its history. Judgment Day, a joint promotional event with Microsoft to launch DirectX, filled a venue with a haunted house, a Ferris wheel, and the world's best Doom players competing on a giant screen for a death match championship. Bill Gates appeared on camera holding a shotgun. Jay Leno hosted. It was as far from a private grading email as a company event could possibly get. Romero wasn't there. He stayed back at the office, finishing Hexen for its own release that week, and he watched the festivities from a distance.
Jesus, man.
Outside of id, nobody could have guessed that any of this was happening. Inside, the company that had just thrown the biggest party in the history of PC gaming had spent the previous 10 days in open warfare with itself, and Quake still had 8 months left to go. 8 months!
That's insane.
You know, Rob, what strikes me about everything happening inside id in late 1995 is that none of it was visible from the outside. The public saw a hammer on the cover of PC Gamer and a promise of constant hectic action. Nobody saw the report card.
In a graded email to the entire company from the guy who gave himself an A minus.
Which is exactly the kind of internal chaos that derails creative projects. And it makes me genuinely grateful that starting this podcast didn't require a shareholder meeting to settle a dispute about who's pulling their weight.
No report cards, no bonus deductions, no Bill Gates holding a shotgun at our launch party.
Well, you know, that last one I'm actually a little bit sad about, but honestly, the rest
Me
of it,
too.
sure. And that's largely because we use Zencaster. It's the all in one podcasting platform that takes the chaos out of the process entirely. You log in from your browser, hit record, and Zencaster instantly captures studio quality audio and up to 4K video. There's no complicated setup, no engine that isn't ready yet.
And what about when things go wrong mid recording? Because if they're going to go wrong, it's mid recording.
Well, that's where Zencaster's multi-layered backups come in, right? Even if your connection drops, your recording stays safe and the highest quality. There's no lost work, no starting over.
And what about editing?
Well, Zencaster's post-production tools automatically clean up the background noise, trim filler words, and balance your audio. All of that polish happens without any of the grind.
And once it's done,
Zencaster distributes your podcast directly to all the major platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more, all from the same dashboard. You can record, refine, and release all in one place.
so basically what id wished making Quake had been.
Easy? Yes. So if you're interested, go over to zencaster.com/pricing and use our offer code, all one word, memory card lane, for 30% off the first month of any Zencaster paid plan. If you've got a story to tell, Zencaster makes sure that the only chaos is in the content.
No internal warfare required.
No, indeed. Head over to Zencaster, use our offer code, all one word, memory card lane, and you can get 30% off your first month.
All right, Dave. So the public has no idea what's going on inside id. What happens when the engine finally ships?
Well, the engine finishes in late November of 1995. After nearly a year of building rooms that nobody could play in, testing textures against geometry that kept changing underneath them, and waiting on code that wasn't ready, the design team had something they could actually work with. So John Carmack calls a meeting. It was finally time to talk about the game. What happens in that room is the hinge that this whole story turns on. John Romero came in expecting to finally move forward on everything the team had spent a year discussing, right? The hammer, the Hellgate cube, the melee combat, the RPG mechanics, the design that had been on the PC Gamer cover just 6 weeks earlier. Instead, American McGee and Dave Taylor tell John Carmack that they don't want to build it. They were burned out. Everyone was burned out. They had built and scrapped 50 levels waiting for an engine that took twice as long as anyone expected. And the idea of spending another year or more figuring out whether a hammer based melee system could even work in a fully 3D engine with no proof of concept, no prototype, no nothing, that felt like stepping off a cliff. They wanted to make a first person shooter. They knew how to make a first person shooter. They had the levels. That work was already done. John Romero looked around the room. American was against the hammer. Dave was against the hammer. Carmack wasn't going to fight for it. Sandy and the others weren't rushing to defend it either. He was alone. I wasn't going to go against everyone else in the company, he told a reporter the following year. The project was just taking too long, and everyone just wanted to fall back on the safe thing, the formula. Once I finished work on Quake, I was done. But he wasn't done yet, right? With the rest of the team unwilling to redesign the game, John Romero had to sit down and redesign the game himself. He took those 50 levels, scattered across the 4 designers' hard drives, and restructured them into 4 episodes of a first person shooter, each one a distinct dimension with its own visual identity. The Gothic stone of the first episode, the Lovecraftian flesh and ruin of the second, Americans' heavy industrial darkness in the third, the cold military architecture of the fourth. What Quake was going to be, that they all had in their minds, died in that meeting. What Quake actually became ended up being John Romero's consolation prize, built in a single afternoon. Now, the 7 months that followed were, by every account, one of the hardest stretches that anyone at id had ever worked through. Crunch set in hard from December of 1995 through to release, with designers building the levels out as fast as the still evolving engine would allow, and programmers plugging holes as fast as they could appear. There were bright spots, though. The networking code that John Cash had been quietly building turned out to be extraordinary, letting players connect over the internet with a smoothness that Doom's multiplayer had never managed. John Carmack was so focused on making Quake the definitive network game that he told the PC Gamer reporter that the networking capability was one of the most important things that they had ever done. That emphasis paid off in ways that nobody fully anticipated. And the soundtrack too came together remarkably fast once Trent Reznor actually got into the studio with the game. He and his drummer, Chris Vrenna, delivered something that was barely music in the traditional sense. Ambient machine noise and synthesized drones layered under the sound effects until the two became almost indistinguishable. Reznor described it as trying to make the most sinister, depressive, frightening thing he could imagine. It worked. The nail gun ammunition boxes shipped with the Nine Inch Nails logo stamped on the side.
Nice.
Then, in the final weeks before release, a legal dispute with Reznor's record label nearly derailed the whole thing. The rights to play audio off of the CD had to be cleared at the last possible moment, and the code to handle it was among the very last changes made before the game went gold. On February 24th, 1996, my 12th birthday,
Yes, sir.
id released Q-Test, a technology demo of 3 multiplayer maps with no single player support and several unfinished elements. It was the first time that anyone outside of id had ever touched the Quake engine. Within days, players had already modified it, dropping AI controlled monsters into the empty multiplayer maps and swapping out player skins with custom art. The game hadn't even shipped yet, and people were already rebuilding it. But they got there. The full game shipped on June 22nd, 1996. John Romero was the only person in the office that day. Not because he was being punished or because he had drawn the short straw. The rest of the team simply didn't come in. There was no launch party, no gathered crowd, no shared moment of release the way there had been for Doom 2, for pretty much every previous id game. Romero sat alone at his desk and he uploaded the shareware files to the internet by himself, and that was that. He had
Wow.
shipped, isn't that crazy?
That's so sad.
He had shipped more groundbreaking games than almost anyone alive, and he did it alone in an empty office on a Tuesday.
And after staying back for the other one during the party. Man, come on. They did our guy dirty.
It didn't take long after that. Within weeks, John Carmack asked John Romero for his resignation. He gave it. And then the walls came down. Michael Abrash left, Sean Green left, Jay Wilbur left, Sandy Peterson left, Mike Wilson left. The team that had built Wolfenstein 3D, Doom, Doom 2, and Quake, 4 of the most important games ever made, dissolved almost completely in the months after Quake shipped.
Wild.
Sandy Peterson, speaking publicly in 2021, offered his own explanation for how it all fell apart. The problem, he said, was that nobody was ever actually put in charge of making Quake. There was no project lead, no single person with the authority to make a call and have it stick. He said he had volunteered for the role himself with 5 years of project management experience from his time at Microprose. Carmack turned him down. Romero, for his part, has said that there is no lasting animosity. In his 2023 memoir, Doom Guy, where I got a lot of the story from, to be fair, he writes about the end of his time at id with grief rather than bitterness, describing the weight of leaving something he helped build from nothing. By 1997, a year out and running his new studio, Ion Storm, his tone at that point was a little sharper. There were a whole bunch of reasons, he told Next Generation magazine, mostly creative differences. I wanted to do different games and take the action genre forward. I think that id wasted its potential with this awesome technology. He also said something that had stayed with people who followed id's history closely. When asked what he originally wanted Quake to be, he described a game closer to Virtual Fighter, a third person melee brawler set inside a fully 3D world. Full contact fighting, a camera that pulled out when you got into combat, something that nobody else had built before. It would have been great, he said, but nobody else had faith in trying it. Now, the game he actually wanted to make, he did eventually make, right? He called it Daikatana, after the sword that his D&D character traded for the end of the world, right? It took 4 years, destroyed his studio, Ion Storm, and is remembered today as one of the most troubled releases in the history of video games. But here's the thing about what Quake actually was. You know, the game Romero didn't want to make. The first person shooter that was just built in an afternoon from 50 orphan levels. It was the first game to render a truly 3-dimensional world in real time, with rooms stacked over rooms and geometry that could twist and wrap around itself in ways that no previous engine allowed. It introduced mouse look as a standard, the ability to aim freely with a mouse in any direction, which is so fundamental to the genre that it's now invisible. That's just the way that a first person game works.
True.
It shipped with Quake C, a built-in programming language that let anyone modify the game's behavior by editing a text file, which touched off a mod scene so productive that it spawned entirely new genres. Team Fortress came from a Quake mod. Capture the Flag as a game mode came from a Quake mod. The studio that eventually built Counter-Strike grew out of the Quake mod ecosystem. And then there was the Machinima. Players discovered that Quake's demo recording system, built to let you replay your own matches, could be used to stage and film original movies inside the game engine. Quake Done Quick, a collaboratively recorded speedrun of the entire game completed in under 20 minutes, was released in June of 1997 and could be played back inside Quake itself as if you were watching it happen live. From there, players began filming narrative films, comedies, action pieces, entirely original stories told through the engine of a first person shooter. The word machinima, we love it, the portmanteau of machine and cinema, was coined to describe what Quake's community had accidentally invented. And it's now an art form, right? With its own festivals, its own history, and its own Wikipedia page. And let's not forget the multiplayer. The networking code that John Cash built, the thing John Carmack told the PC Gamer reporter was the most important thing they had done, turned out to be the seed of something that helped reshape how people thought about games entirely. Quake World, an update released later that year, made internet play dramatically smoother for millions of players still on dial-up connections. Competitive Quake became one of the first things that anyone ever seriously called an esport. A player named Dennis Fong ended up winning John Carmack's Ferrari at a Microsoft sponsored tournament in 1997 in front of
God
a
damn.
crowd alongside prize money, and the event, Rob, was called Red Annihilation.
That wow, an entire Ferrari. That's insane.
The team that built all of that was gone before the year after the game was out. The partnership that had invented the first person shooter genre with Doom, with Wolfenstein 3D and then Doom, built the engine that made it real, and then broken apart over whether to keep innovating or ship the thing. That whole partnership ended with one man alone in an office uploading files on a Tuesday afternoon. In 2025, Quake was inducted into the World Video Game Hall of Fame. John Romero attended the ceremony. This time, he was surrounded by people, far removed from that Tuesday afternoon alone. If today's episode sent you deeper into the history of id Software, we've got plenty of ground already covered that connects directly to the story. Episode 15 tells you the full story of Doom, the game that made id a household name and planted the seed that Quake spent 2 years trying to grow beyond. Episode 88 goes back even further to Wolfenstein 3D, where it all started. And if you want to hear about the game that was waiting in the wings while id was tearing itself apart, episode 38 covers Unreal, the competitor that picked up right where Quake left off and then pushed the genre in its own direction. You can find all of these episodes and everything else in our archive at www.memorycardlane.com. Rob, what else can people find when they head to the site?
You can find a calendar of our future and previous episode topics. No, we will or have talked about in this year, not just in our archives. You can find a link to our Discord server where you can chat with Dave and I. You can find a link to our Patreon where you can get access to our ad-free and unedited versions of all of our podcasts. Hear what goes on behind the scenes that you're not hearing in our clean, polished episodes. And you can find links to our social media where I am on several platforms as Rob_O_Raptor and Dave.
I can be found on various platforms as David is Wrong. Each week, we'll tell you one story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game, a person, a technology, a console. We've even covered a few places before. While telling you each story, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. When we sit down to research new topics each week, we get excited when we find out new things to share with you. It's a fantastic cycle of learning and teaching, teaching and learning, and in celebration of said cycle, we like to talk about our takeaways each week. So, Rob, what did you learn today?
Well, I think my big takeaway for today is just how dirty they did our boy John Romero. I mean, it's just crazy to me that like multiple games he was the sole person to stay behind, not go out to these events and make sure that it got out there. And then despite all of that, he was still asked to resign. It's just, obviously you think, oh, woe is me, I'm a hard worker and I'm not getting treated right, blah blah blah. But that man, unless there's something that's not out there that he just did nothing and somehow sat around. But the fact that he was still there getting the stuff out kind of makes that not believable. So like, why was he a dick?
I don't I I wish I knew that because like it also makes me not like John Carmack and I don't know if I should like John Carmack or not.
Yeah, like obviously maybe there's something that the public doesn't know that wasn't, and I mean you've got most of this from a memoir from him, so like obviously biased, but like what's going on? Why?
I couldn't tell
So,
you.
but that's the big one for me. It's wild to me, but it's also crazy. 9 Inch Nails.
I know that's cool, right?
That's cool. I mean the nails, and it's fitting because originally there was a hammer, and what do you hit with a hammer?
Nails.
Boom.
Well played.
Exactly. See. But then it wasn't a hammer anymore, and 9 Inch Nails didn't really make sense. Nirvana might have made more sense at that point. Anyway, Dave, what's your big takeaway?
I never knew that Quake was one thing and then it was another, right? The origins as a D&D story and the fact that it spent shoot 80-90% of its development time as an like a role-playing game. That was shocking. Like that I would have never been able to tell you that. Like cuz I don't remember that PC Gamer ad, right? Like Quake, I just don't yeah, I mean it was shocking to find out it was one thing than the other. So that's a cool story. This was a cool story. This is honestly a cool story.
Oh, I
So,
agree.
I told you leading up to this I was excited for this one. I love me some drama and there's plenty of drama here.
There's a ton of drama here.
But this is just a really fascinating story. These this group of men, were so influential. Like the games they built, Wolfenstein and Doom and Quake, like that period of time when id was just in charge of like they were on top of the industry. Like these guys were so influential. If you go back and you look at like these magazines naming the most influential people in computer gaming or in computers, uh, Carmack was number one on that list at least one of those years. Like these are the guys, and this game broke them all up. It's crazy.
It
That's all.
is insane when you think about it.
Absolutely crazy. All right, Rob. Well, before I take it out of here, wrap it up, and look ahead to next week, is there anything that you'd like to add to today's episode?
I'll just take a quick moment to say thank you so much to everyone for listening. We really appreciate you joining us every week or for the first time, who knows, as we take our trip down memory card lane. So thank you.
Thank you indeed. Quake was never supposed to be what it became. It started as a D&D character with a magic hammer, became a half-formed action role-playing game that spent a year waiting on an engine, and ended as a first-person shooter that one man redesigned in an afternoon because the rest of the room had run out of the patience for something harder. The fracture that it produced was real, and it was painful. A graded email nobody talked about, a shareholder meeting that turned into a formal confrontation, a launch day spent alone in an empty office, and then, one by one, the people who built it walked right out the door. But the game they made in spite of all of that, the safe thing, the formula, the consolation prize, it turned out to be one of the most influential pieces of software ever written. It gave the world true 3D. It gave the world modability as a standard. It gave the world competitive online gaming and an art form nobody had a name for yet. John Romero wanted to make something nobody had ever seen before. What he got instead was something that nobody has ever forgotten. In 2025, he stood in a room full of people to accept the recognition for it. A long, long way from that Tuesday afternoon alone. Next week, we are putting down the keyboard and picking up something your parents definitely told you not to use. In 1990, a small plastic cartridge adapter arrived in North American toy stores and immediately became the most controversial thing in gaming that didn't involve a single drop of blood. The Game Genie didn't make you better at video games, it just lets you ignore the rules entirely. And Nintendo was not happy about it. But before we get to that inevitable lawsuit, we need to talk about the device itself, where it came from, what it actually did to the game's code, and why a piece of plastic that cost $25 terrified one of the most powerful companies in the world. So join us as we find out what happens when someone hands every kid on the block a key to the back door, as we take next week's trip down memory card lane. Do the thing.
Ba-ba-dum, ba-ba-bum-ba-dum, ba-bow.